I have two questions. First question is, I loved Gadhafi. I know it's very controversial to say that. There was no employment. The country was having a positive balance, as an economy. And when outside forces came in, African Union did not do anything. That was sad. An African leader was taken on the streets and killed. What are you going to do as African Union to get some teeth in the defense processes of the continent? That's the first question.
I'm glad you asked that question. And if the truth be told, the African Union was not pleased with the manner in which the UN Security Council voted to take out Saddam in the manner that they did. The African Union had a plan. President Zuma of South Africa, had already accepted him for asylum. Plans were underway to talk to Gadhafi for him to move to South Africa. So yes, the decision to take out Gadhafi went against the wishes of the African Union. We wished things had been handled a little differently. You're quite right. I think, but when you're coming up against more powerful forces, again, it goes back to Africa taking its rightful place on the world stage. But AU was clearly opposed to the manner in which Gadhafi was taken out without a plan for replacement, which is what led us to the Libya that we have today.
My second question, black racism on white. I've seen farms being taken over by Mugabe forces, the ZANU-PF people. What is the African Union doing when we talk about racism from Africa and we bash colonists and we actually are doing that to their citizens right there? What are you going to do to recompensate and rehabilitate those citizens who have been there for 4 generations, 5 generations? What is African Union going to do for that?
Okay, I like the fact that you're putting a timeline there. See, with history, we have a tendency to say, well, let's start the story from here moving forward. But let's not talk about the story going back. In Zimbabwe, you have to say, how did we get there? Let me take 1 minute and summarize it for you. When the British came to Zimbabwe, they analyzed the country and divided it into 4 regions. Region 1 was the best soil, the best rains, best conditions for farming. Region 2, pretty close to Region 1. Region 3, there were some areas there, the soil was not so good, and the rain was good, but not the best. Region 4, no rain. The soil was horrible, mosquitoes and sassaflies. So they set out a plan. If you were an adventurous British, a veteran of the First or Second World War, you were guaranteed 2,000 hectares. Hectares, multiply 2,000 by 2.2. You were guaranteed that much in Zimbabwe, plus any loot from the local people. So a British man would land in Zimbabwe. So based on the regions that they had decided, they were going to move all the black people, preferably from the region 1 and 2 to region 4. So the process started. And how did a British map up their land? You got on a horse, they'll tell you this region. Get on a horse and you ride in one direction for a day until either you or your horse were tired. You put your bag. Tomorrow morning you do the same thing. So it took 4 days for the Englishman to map up his land. At the end of the 4 days, everything in it is yours. And the people who lived on that land were told, in this direction, go past this mountain. In this direction, go past this river. They left with whatever they could carry. The chickens, the goats, the cows, they were theirs. And some of them were not so lucky. You barely settled again when another Englishman came and he was given that part. And there you were again. Slowly the process of moving black people to the west parts of the country started, and it was finally completed in the 50s. Now, you want to ask me who needs to be compensated? Are you with me?
Yes.
So we got to go to the beginning. rather than understanding things superficially. How did you get your hand? It just goes about how fast you could go. Some of these farmers were owning 5, 6, 7 farms. I know my family farm, and I grew up hearing the story from my own father. When the situation took place in the case of my father, he remembers distinctly he was a teenager. And he used to, when white men came to Africa with their pants, they called them men without knees. He remembers men without knees coming to the village on horses. There was some hush-hush talk. He didn't know what was going on. But he remembers waking up one morning and the whole village was on fire. They were being torched by these men without knees on horses. His aunt was pregnant and was due any day. So they had asked for permission for her to stay until she delivers. It was one little hut that was left standing in a burnt-out village. They left with whatever they could carry. Sadly for them, Aunt didn't deliver for 3 weeks. My father spoke about how scared he was every morning. The men without knees coming to check and see if my aunt had delivered. There was him, an uncle, another grandmother who was a midwife, and another aunt. They all crumbled up in this one room. When she finally delivered, 3 days after delivery, they were told to walk, go find the others who had left before. Now the loot law, it's in the history books. You don't have to go far. It's in the British history books. As a matter of fact, the British started fighting themselves over how to distribute the loot as they go from one place, one village to the other. It was acceptable. So, son, do you still want to ask me who is owed what? May I rest my case?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
But those people still have families. We need to be compassionate.
Thank you.
Those people still have families too. I do have families. And when I go home and they're still in Region 4, I got a problem with that.
Thank you. Just to expand a bit from the ambassador's very passionate statement, land tenure is an extremely important issue in every African country. And until that is modernized, it will be very, very difficult to have modern agriculture. And in some countries, the land belongs to the state, and the farmer is there maybe for his whole life, but he never owns it. So land tenure, it's an extreme case in Zimbabwe, but in every country, land tenure is a major issue that you don't read much about. Next.
Good evening, Madam Ambassador.
Good evening.
Ambassador Cohen, thank you so much for providing this platform to discuss African affairs. Like you stated earlier, Madam Ambassador, Africa is the richest continent. I fully agree with you on that. And we do see this resurgence of a scramble of Africa from China, India, and of course the Western nations. And my family is from Kenya. I spent some time in Kenya in 2010. And what I noticed is that the Chinese did wonderful infrastructure projects in Kenya that really helped revitalize the streets, etc. However, I also noticed that many Kenyans are also very qualified to do the same type of jobs, such as engineering, construction work, etc., but we're just unemployed. So I'm wondering, what is the African Union doing to maybe like a policy change for the continent, where you do have the Chinese coming in and doing infrastructure projects, but they're also employing the youth? Because you see in Kenya, for example, the youth is very educated, but they're unemployed. So if you're unemployed, you'll get involved in things that are not good for the society that we all frown upon. So what can the African Union do to, yes, bring the Chinese in, or whoever, the Western, from France, from Britain, but also employ the people, the youth in particular?
Your point is well taken. And like I mentioned earlier, we are actually seeing a change in the attitude. Now Chinese companies are being made to hire the locals, because that has been a problem. I'm not sure why it took so long to begin to do the pullback, but now, yes, absolutely, they are required to hire locals and also train locals. But at the same time, I go back to say, even we as diaspora, rather than sit here in America and other parts of the world and shoot out complaints, there is a role that we can play. But because we are not coming together as Africans, individually, we are groups of people who are sending, I think formally, anywhere from $50 to $60 billion into Africa. Informally, estimates say over $100 billion. And yet, we can't come together. If we were to come together and get that money into Africa in an organized way, Africa does not even need the aid. We can change our own circumstances. So at some point, while we are trying to figure out what we need to do, we must first and foremost own what we need to own and take responsibility for that which we can do for ourselves. So for that one, my sister, I'll take it back to you to say, rather than complain about the Chinese, what have you done for Africa?
Thank you.
Yeah.
I just make one point about the Chinese. One thing they'll never do is to have senior management among the Africans. If you go to Angola, Chevron Corporation in Angola producing 2 million barrels a day, the CEO is an African. You'll never see that in a Chinese company. But I agree with the ambassador. The African governments are taking charge more and more in making sure the Chinese employ Africans rather than Chinese in a lot of their companies. Next question.
Hello. Sorry for my voice. It's a little raspy today. Thank you.
Better than me.
Yeah. Thank you for coming to speak to us today. And my question deals with the Nile River. And more specifically, I'd be interested to know what your stance is, and then collectively what the AU stance is on the conflict between Egypt and Ethiopia over the Nile, and to what degree is the African Union...
My name is Daniel Zaire, and since the signing of the Rome Statute, the International Criminal Court has been one of the greatest success stories for international justice. But we've seen within the last year or so, there's a number of African Union member states that have shown intent to leave the International Criminal Court because of a perceived bias against African war criminals when compared to war criminals from elsewhere. Every individual to stand trial in the ICC has been African. What is your comment on that? And what is your comment on the fact that a lot of AU member states wish to leave the ICC?
Well, I think they do need to leave the ICC because there is a bias. Africa needs to have its own criminal court, and that is in the works. It is that simple.
Is that simple?
It is that simple.
Why hasn't there been anyone from Myanmar indicted by the ICC?
Absolutely.
That's a fact.